also have the output. Like what I'm telling is, let's say like you have, let's say like you have data like 2 it is odd, even 3 it is odd. So you have the data as well as output, and you feed the data and output to the computer and ask the computer to figure out the pattern. You ask the computer to figure out the logic of finding whether it's a even or odd. So I hope that is clear. Sorry, at any time if you want to stop me, you can move forward. You can also use the chat box to ask those. I'll just leave it open. Yeah. So that is the difference between traditional programming and machine learning. So yeah, this is a small example. Like we discussed finding whether number is even or not. Like finding if a number is prime or not. It's like it's a let's say if you are writing a normal traditional programming, you have to code the logic out. If n greater less than equal to 1, if n less than equal to 3, and you divide, like see the factors. So you are coding the entire logic by yourself. But what does machine learning do is it generates like a pair of number is prime, but this like it's not like you have a data, you have an output, and you feed it to the computer, and you figure out the pattern of the model. So that's how this works. I think that's a slight mistake in the slide. It should be twin primes, not prime number. I'm sorry. Okay. So that's very. 3 comma 5 is a twin prime, but 1 comma 2 is not. So something like that. So you have an input, you have an output, feed it to the computer, and ask it to figure out the the pattern or what do you call the logic. So that's the machine learning. It's like, okay, I understand it's a bit superficial, but yeah, that's the scope of this lecture. But let's say like this problem is pretty easy for us. You have a number, you know the logic already. It's easy to program in traditional programming. But what about like if you're given an image of cat, you're like given an image, you want to find whether the image is of a cat or a dog. How do you do it? Let's say if you go with traditional programming, like would you will you be able to write the logic? It's impossible because like let's say this image is like 240 pixels. So which means you will have 240 cross 240 number of data points, as well as it's in 3 dimension because it's a color image rather than a black and white image. So we can't just go and tell how to identify between a dog and a cat. One thing you can use it to see the whiskers, but you can't give an if else condition on all that all the pixels and traditionally providing the logic to find the whether it's given a cat or dog. But what does machine learning do is it finds the pattern itself. It finds the pattern that okay, hey, these cat images have whiskers, but the dog doesn't have. So it finds the pattern on its own, and it's able to generate the predictions, or it's able to build the model. So that's the difference between machine learning and traditional programming. And in the applications of image recognition or and speech recognition, deep learning beats the traditional programming hands down. So that's the advantage of traditional programming. Yeah. Now let us come to the point. See, the talk is about neural networks. Why I am emphasizing so about machine learning? Like, let's come to the point here. So this is a famous a computer scientist called Tom Mitchell. He defined machine learning in this way: a computer program is set to learn from experience E with respect to some class of task T and a performance measure P if its performance increases with the experience. So what does he really mean here is, so let's say the task, let's have the task. The task is to find, given an image, whether it's a cat or a dog. And the performance is going to be the accuracy, like how accurate you are going to predict whether how accurately you are predicting the images. So that's the performance. And experience E is going to be data. So with more data, you can perform the task easily. With more data of dogs and cats, you can perform the classification between dogs and cats more easily with a higher accuracy. So what is actually meaning is you give more data, the performance improves in predicting. Can you think of something in real life that happens? Let's say that is a task T, and with improved experience, you are improving your performance on the task T. Can you just think of something like when the first thing I thought about this is like a human activity. Let's say if a child wants to learn cycling, so what does he do? he takes into the like he takes the cycle, he falls down for the first time because he has very less experience, but gradually riding more and more, uh, he would have achieved some perfection riding the cycle. So it's like with experience, a particular task, his performance increases. So that's the basis of neural networks. I think that's how neural networks gave birth to this, because the best learners in the current world is the humans. We learn to perfect the task with experience. So that's where the inspiration from for the neural network came from. Whether can we create a system such a way that it can mimic the human performance, or it can mimic the human learning. And what machine do we have in our? We have brains, so it is consist of neural networks. So that's the inspiration. That's where the inspiration came for the neural networks way back. So that's the starting point of why neural networks. Now let us go to the history of neural networks. Okay. Now initially there will be some biology jargons, because we have to give credit to the early biologists for coming up with this neural networks. So let's start with it. So Joseph von Gerlach, he proposed that a nervous system in a human brain is a single continuous network, as opposed to as a network of discrete cells. So what he is telling is, there is a let's say these are neurons, like the neurons in the brain. These everything together is a single network. That's what Mr. Joseph von Gerlach proposed. And there was a famous scientist called Camillo Golgi, who supported the same thing by using a staining technique to show that the neural networks are it's a single continuous network and not discrete. So that's what these two gentlemen have discovered. But later, Kayal, another famous biologist, observed that nervous system is made of discrete individual cells. So in his paper, what he actually discovered is, let's say, A is a discrete cell, E is a discrete cell, D is a discrete network, it's a cellular network, and B is a discrete network. So what he proposed with an advanced staining technique is, the nervous system consists of discrete network of neurons. So that's what Mr. Kayal had proposed. And it was validated with advanced staining techniques, and finally it was proven that Kayal's theory was correct, that the neural network is not a single continuous network. It is made up of discrete individual cells. So that's the conclusion of the experiments. And this is a gentleman, Heinrich Gottfried, who actually was the father of the neural networks, we used to tell, because he compiled every the research findings before, and he consolidated the neural doctrine. And one more fun fact is, he also termed the name chromosomes. It's very interesting that a single man has coined the two big terms in biology: neuron as well as chromosomes. And later, now the theory they have told that in the theory they have identified that the neural network is made up of discrete individual cells. And with the latest advancements in imaging and electron imaging, the theory was validated again and again. And it seems like let's say there is a two neural cells, and there is some communication between the two neural cells. So that's what at the end of every research we found out, it was concluded that the neural network consists of discrete individual cells. They have some communication between them. That's it, nothing else. Okay. Now let us actually dive into the artificial neural networks. So that's what, so these inspirations came from the real neural networks, the real neurons, which is present in the human body, like the thing we discussed till now. Now, the computer scientists, statisticians, and logic scientists, everyone, they started experimenting on mimicking the human neurons. They want to simulate the human neurons so as to find whether can we create an artificial neuron, something like that. So the very first breakthrough was by McCulloch and Pitts, two famous gentlemen, and then termed the particular neuron, the neuron called as McCulloch and Pitts neuron, which is shortly called as MP neuron. They proposed a very simple model of an artificial neuron. So this is the model they propose. So there are n inputs, x1, x2, x3 till xn, and there is outputs, y equal to 0 or 1, and g can be some function, and f can be some function on that. So the very simple thing, let's say. So how do you decide when you're hungry? let's take a real example. How do you decide when you're hungry? Like X1. This inputs can, like, this, since this tries to mimic an human neuron. I'm just giving you one, example that concerns our metabolism. So, like, let's say, like, when can you be hungry? X1, like, it can be like whether your stomach is slightly up, like it's slightly paining. X2, you can be tired, and or you don't have enough stamina. So, like, these can be the inputs. So X1 can be like whether your stomach is upset or not. X2 can be like whether you're tired. So X3 can be your stamina levels. So these can be the inputs. And what does the brains do? Based on the collection of input, it generates an output. The output is clear whether you are actually hungry or not. So this way how the human body works, the human neural network works. But how can we model that into another, another example, a real world example? Let's say, like, if I, like, let's say a task is to, to see whether a restaurant is good or not. So what can be the inputs? X1 can be the ratings in Swiggy. X2 can be the ratings in Zomato. X3 can be the ratings in Google, and there can be like a lot of other factors. Like, for example, X4 can be the distance of the restaurant from like the city center. Generally, the restaurant in the city center seems to be more good than whatever is out there. So, like, these can be the inputs. You can aggregate the inputs and generate an output, like, whether the restaurant is good or not. So, like, that's how we can, that was the motive of this Metrology and Fitbit to create an artificial neuron for their own application. So that this was the biggest breakthrough that was ever found in neuron, and this is what started the revolution in artificial neurons, and it was in 1943. And later in 1958, a gentleman named Frank Rosenblatt created a modified form of the epineuron. In epineuron, you just have input, and you have an aggregation, and you have an output. So what Rosenblatt did is he gave weight to each input, X1, X2, and X3. Let's say, like, let's again use this example. Let's say if you want to watch a movie, let Y be the output, like whether you want to watch the movie or not. So that can be the output, and the input can be like, X1 is whether the director is Christopher Nolan, X2 is like, whether the music is by Hans Zimmer, and X3 is like, like whether Leonardo DiCaprio is the hero. Different people may have different opinions. For someone, like, Christopher Nolan movie would be more priority, and for someone, Hans Zimmer movie might be more priority, and for others, Leonardo DiCaprio acting might be more priority. So these priorities can be changed with the input and the task. So that way he introduced weight. So with weight, what we can do is we can give more weight to one particular input compared to the other inputs. So that's the, that's how Frank Rosenblatt moved forward with perceptron model, and it was a big hit back in 1990, like, in the early machine learning era. It is like, I just zoomed in the perceptron model. So X1, X2, X3 are inputs, W and W3 are, the weights, and Y is going to be the output. And there are some limitations on perceptron because, like, a single perceptron can only learn to classify linearly separable data points. What I mean by linearly separable is, for example, let's take this case. Like, you have 3 points with a single line. You can divide the red points and the green points, but you can't do it for the dot function because, like, a single line cannot, divide the red points and green points. So that was the limitation. And later they came up with multi-layer perceptron. What I told is, instead of the single perceptron, let me stack up the perceptron. Let me stack up the perceptrons and give output. So that was the idea given by Mr. Emerson and Co. And it's like very first of a kind. But it's and the history of neural networks stopped for a bit here. The reason is because people, like, when they saw that the single layer perceptron cannot classify non-linearly separable data points, people thought, that's no more, scope to do this research. People never really paid attention to the multi-layer perceptron, and for some point of time, the neural networks had a problem. The research was not going forward, but later there was a breakthrough. Let us go to the breakthrough. So what actually happened is a gentleman named Cauchy. Sometimes in your max classes, like Cauchy's inequality, Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. So Cauchy was a great mathematician, and he actually found an algorithm called the gradient descent algorithm back in 1800s, and it was initially used to compute the orbit of the heavenly bodies. It has nothing to do with neural networks. But this particular gradient descent method later came to be the savior of the machine learning or deep learning or neural networks or whatever. And like even now, any algorithm you use, except for like the tree-based models, you will find the gradient descent in almost every algorithm in machine learning. So the gradient descent was there, and there was a paper on. So this is the idea of gradient descent. What is it? There is a loss function, and there are like a particular parameters. So what you do? What the algorithm does is it finds the parameter set that gives the minimum loss. So that's what gradient descent does in a nutshell. And this gradient descent was compiled into particularly for neural networks. So we have to learn the weights for the neural networks. I think like what I mean is these W1, W2, W3, right? These weights we can't hand code it. If we start to hand code it, it becomes a traditional machine learning. It's become a traditional programming methods. But in case we have an algorithm to find the optimal weights, then that is called machine learning, right? So that's what these people did. They combined the gradient descent and neural networks to find an algorithm called backpropagation, and this is what was the game changer in neural networks. Once this there's a slight caveat. Let me come to the data. Once this backpropagation is found, people are happy that they will be able to train a neural network to multiply. So that was happening, but later what happened is backpropagation wasn't really too good for a long readily like chat or wrong. Initially, the backpropagation wasn't able to train harder because we need to have an initial guess of the weight. This W, like, that's what I mean. Let's say the gradient descent. In the gradient descent, you have an initial guess. From the initial guess, you go to the global mean. That's how gradient descent works. The thing is that,
Sir, excuse me, sir. Sir, there is some disturbance in your mic, sir. Voice not clear, sir.
just a minute.
Okay.
Hello. Is it fine now?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Sorry.
Now it's okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move forward. So what I was telling is like people find hard time identifying these initial weights. This initial weight was finding the optimal initial weight was a big hurdle for them for practical applications. And this paper at an efficient learning procedure for deep Boltzmann machines. This particular paper changed the face of neural networks. With this particular method, people were able to start with a good weight so that they end up in the global minima, and that's when the boom of the machine learning started and boom of the neural network started. So all the new craze you're hearing about the neural networks, deep learning, it all started from this unsupervised pre-training. And we won't really touch upon this, but yeah, let's go into it. And later there was something called as convolutional neural networks, which is particularly for images, and this was all possible because of the gentleman named Hubel and Wiesel. So they're actually a biologist, and they had some cat experimentation. So what they actually did is they projected some images in the screen and see which part of the cat's brain was able to absorb that particular pattern. Let's say they have a particular triangle, which means that this particular shape affected only one part of the cat's brain. And let's say if you give a new shape, like let's say you can see the various shapes, and you can see the various stimulus. So one particular part of the brain responded to one particular patterns. So this gave an inspiration to Hubel and Wiesel that let's come up with some artificial neural network that can simulate a brain. This is particularly for images. So what they did is they design something called, like later people design something called convolutional neural networks. So what happens is, given an image, we take a filter and we see the patterns within the filter. So this filter is otherwise called as this filter has the weights which is similar with the weights which we saw in perceptrons. The same weights exist in these filters. So based on this, they came up with the networks called convolutional neural networks, and this is like a slightly advanced topic beyond the scope and the topic of the talk. So it's just an introduction. I just want to put this here. And when the convolutional neural networks started to develop, people started using CNNs. And again, sorry, convolutional neural networks is otherwise in short form it is called as CNNs in industry. So people use the CNNs to identify the characters. So optical character recognition was a huge, it was a huge application of CNNs, and there was tons of papers out there. Then people started giving dataset, MNIST dataset. This MNIST dataset consists of the numbers, and the task was to identify whether identify the given number in the image. So when different datasets and different people started contributing towards this, the field of the convolutional network started to increase. It started to widen its scope. And later, I think this is the biggest, the advancement in CNNs is because of the ImageNet challenge. So the task is they'll give a photo and you'll have to classify whether it's a mammal or whether it's a placental or carnivore or a canine. So this was a task of the ImageNet challenge. A lot of companies, a lot of industries started contributing towards this particular task, and big companies like Google, Microsoft started contributing towards this particular thing. And I think that's what boosted the neural networks in the modern era. So, and if convolutional neural networks is for images, there's something called recurrent neural networks for text classification or text-based learning methods. So we won't go deep into this, but let me just give you an idea. So there is an input similar to the perceptrons. We have some layers in between, but there will be some feedback. That you see the recurrence rate. There will be some feedback from the forward, the layers at the front to the layers at the back. So that's what differentiates recurrent neural networks from normal neural networks. And why do we have this feedback? Is generally in text-based applications, the words together have a meaning. The order of the words have a meaning. And I think everyone must have are using smartphone now, and you must have a feature called autocorrect or auto predict. So this auto predict depends on the word before, right? So that's the intuition behind this recurrent neural networks. And and needless to say, we have tons. The field is ever expanding. The field is ever growing up, and still there might be new algorithms in the future. Who knows? But yeah, this is the whole history of neural networks. How it started as how it started with imaging techniques in the brain. Then it moved into an artificial neuron called MP neuron. Then it went to perceptron. Then it went to feed-forward neural networks. People found different algorithms like backpropagation, unsupervised speed training. So those things led to the boom. And currently, what is happening is the computing power has increased a lot from compared to the early 90s, 1950s and 1960s. Computing power is it's very fast, and people started using graphical processing unit like GPUs instead of CPUs for training your networks, and these things led to the advancement in neural networks. So yeah, I think that's about the introduction. Now let's go into the early models. We'll see the early models. We'll be briefly discussing MP neuron, perceptron, as well as a slight overview on feed-forward neural networks. Yeah. Let's start. Just give me a moment. I'll just take some water. Okay, is there anything which you didn't get till now? Because from now it will start to get more logic heavy. So if there's something in concerns you have some doubts, please put in the chat box. I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, as you told, the inspiration for neural networks comes with biological neuron, like what we see before. So what actually happens is a biological neuron has something called a cell body called soma, and there's something called dendrites. This particular the root-like structure is called dendrites. So what this dendrites does is it receives the information from the other cells, and the neuron passes the information, processes it, and it transmits to other neurons. So that's how the neural network works. So you have an input, you take the input, you process it, and you give it as an output. So yeah, this is what an actual biological neuron does, and this is what we, as a a computer scientist or in industry, we are trying to mimic in an artificial neuron. So let's say let's just take a very simple example. Let's say how you get scared by a ghost movie or a horror movie. So either the visuals can be terrifying or the audio effects can be terrifying. So what decides whether you get afraid or not? So what does is the human neuron or the any human neuron takes these inputs. It takes the visual inputs, it takes the audio inputs, it processes it, and it generates a reaction. So the reaction can be whether you are afraid or not. And this particular, and as different humans, like this particular threshold can be different for different humans. Let's say if I'm a more person who doesn't, who's not afraid of scary movies, my threshold for scariness will be much higher. But it's simple, right? Just what I want to tell you here. What I want to tell here is, you have a input. You have different sets of inputs. The human neuron processes all the inputs and generates a reaction or an output. So that's the motive of this particular image here. And let's say see, this is a very simplified model of human neuron. Obviously, we don't have a single neuron that's going to determine whether we are afraid or not. There can be a network of neurons. So let's say this particular neuron fires only if the visuals is scary. So this generates the output only if the visuals is scary, and this fires if only the audio is scary. Let's say this particular neuron, it generates output only if the audio is scary, and let's say the dialogues can sometimes be scary. So this particular neuron can generate the output only if the dialogues are scary. So what this particular neuron does is, it takes all three outputs of this and it generates whether fire if at least two of the neurons fire up, which means either if at least if the two of the three things happens, then this fires. So this is how a biological neural network works. You receive inputs, you pass on to higher levels, and there will be one particular neuron that's going to decide, one particular system that's going to decide whether it's scary or not. So this is the how a biological neuron or biological neural networks works in a very simplified way, and that's what we're going to try mimic at MP neuron. So as I told, we had this example, when you feel hungry or not, or let's take the other example, predicting whether a restaurant is good or not. So X1 can be the, as I told, ratings in Zomato, X2 can be ratings in Swiggy, X3 can be the ratings in what do you call Google. But the initial model suggested by MP neuron has a hypothesis that the inputs can be input should only be binary. So what happens here is then, which means we have to modify the inputs, whether the input for whether the ratings in Swiggy is high or low. High is for 1, low is for 0, and whether in the ratings in Zomato is high or not. And all the inputs is going to be binary, and G is going to aggregate all the binary inputs, and it's going to generate an output based on your inputs. So this is the mathematical equation of what happens. So what is f of g of x does is, it takes in all the input. Let's see what g of x does. The g of x aggregates all the inputs. As you can see here, g of x1 to xn is equal to sum of all the xi's. So it aggregates all the inputs. In other words, it adds all the inputs. And what f does is, it generates output 1 if g of x is greater than a threshold, and if g of x is less than the threshold, it gives output as 0. So that's what this MP neuron does. So let's take in our example, if the restaurant, let's say x1 is 1, that the Swiggy's rating is high for a restaurant, and Zomato rating is low, so x2 will be 0. But Google rating is high, x3 is 1. So what does G do is, it takes 1 plus 0 plus 0, which is equal to 2. Let's say you set a threshold to 1. Then it's 2 is greater than or equal, our output is greater than or equal to the threshold. then the output will be 1. Let's say if you have a lesser threshold, then its output is 0. So that's how the MP neuron model was proposed to be, and this theta had to be hand coded. There is no particular learning method for this particular thing, but this was a though this is not a proper machine learning architecture, it's still a good and it will provide the first idea about an artificial neuron. So let's start with a practical example of what happens. Let's say you have 3 inputs, and as I told, the 3 inputs are binary here. And let's say if you want to create an OR function, the Boolean OR, like let's say x1, x2, x3 are Boolean inputs, and if you want to have y to be an output in such a way that it will mimic an OR function, what has to be the threshold? Can someone in the chat boxes reply if possible? Like my question is, we have 3 Boolean inputs, x1, x2 and x3. We are aggregating it, and we want to generate an OR output, which is an OR function. So what will theta be? What should be the threshold? Okay, maybe I'll just give the first model I'll give you. Later we'll have an interactive session. Let's say. So first let us see an AND function. What is an AND function? AND function will give 1 only if all threes are 1s. You got it right? Let's say we have an AND function, then all 3 must be 1. Only if all 3s are 1, the output will be 1. So in that case, what should be the threshold? What can be a threshold? What I'm telling is theta can be 3. Let's say x1, x2 and x3, yeah, 1, 1, 1. What does g of x do? It adds all the input. So g of x is going to return x1 plus x2 plus x3. In this case, it will be 1 plus 1 plus 1, this is 3. So if g of x is greater than theta, then it should give 1. So for theta can be set as 3 for an AND function. Y3, let's say if any of the input is 1, 0. Let's say if x1 is 1, x2 is 1 and x3 is 0. What happens? An AND function will generate 0 because it is not an AND function. In AND function, all 3 must be 1, right? So it should generate false. So let's see how it translates into the mathematical equation. X1 plus x2 plus x3 here will be 1 plus 1 plus 0, which is 2. And we have threshold as 3. So here 2 is less than 3. So the g of x is less than the threshold. So it will give 0. So that in turn, when you set theta equal to 3, this particular neuron mimics an AND function. Is it clear, or should I explain it again? Can someone just let me know? Is it clear or? Thank you. So that's what happens in an AND function. So let's say an OR function. An OR function, it's simple. What does OR do? It takes all 3 inputs and it outputs 1. If any of the single input is 1, it outputs 0 only if all 3s are 0. That's what an OR function does. So we can set theta equal to 1 for it. Let's say x1 equal to 1, x2 equal to 0 and x3 equal to 1. So what will g of x be? G of x will be 1 plus 0 plus 1, which is 2. And the threshold is 1 here. So 2 is greater than or equal to 1, which means y equal to be 1 here. The output to be 1 here. So let's say all 3s are 0, like x1, x2, x3, all 3 are 0. Then g of x will be sum of all 3, which is again 0. And 0 is less than the threshold, 1. So it will give 0. So in turn, this particular neuron mimics an OR function. So that's how that's how the thresholding logic works here. So what people saw is, based on few inputs, you can set the threshold in such a way that this particular neuron will mimic a Boolean function. But what is let's say what does all this neuron does in a geometric sense? Let's say if you want to design an OR function, what you have to do? Like sum of the g of x must be greater than or equal to 1. G of x is equal to x1 plus x2. And this is x1 plus x2 must be greater than or equal to 1. This is the particular equation that's going to govern our learning principle here. So x1 plus x2 is greater than or equal to 1. So as you could see, in a Cartesian plane system, we are drawing a line, and this is going to be the line. x1 plus x2 is greater than or equal to 1, is going to generate this region, this particular region. So that's what a neuron does. So what a neuron does is, in turn, in a geometric sense, it creates a hyperplane. This particular dividing line is called as hyperplane. Why is it called as hyperplane? Because if x1 plus x2 is greater than or equal to 1, output is 1. If x1 plus x2 is less than 1, then output is 0. So what does it mean is, this particular line, if this particular line, the points on the line and above the line is considered as 1, and what is below is considered as 0. So that's the, what it does in a geometric sense, this neuron. So for an AND function, it will be like, x1 plus, since we, and again, this is, we have only 2 inputs here. Like we discussed the example before for 3 inputs, this is 2 inputs. So let's say for an AND function, what actually we need as an output? Let's say if 1, 0 is 0, because for an AND function, both must be 1. So 0, 0 is 0, output is 0. For 0, 1, output is 0. 1, 0, output is 0. And only for 1, 1, the output is 1. So the threshold, that's why we set the threshold to be 2. So what does this represent? x1 plus x2 is greater than or equal to 2. So this is going to represent this line, this particular line. So whatever points that lie on or above this line is considered as 1. And whatever that lies below is considered as 0. So you can understand, right? This particular neuron is now able to create a line such a way that it's going to mimic an AND function. As you can see, like you see all 3 points, 0, 1, 0, 0, and 1, 0. All 3 are now negative 0 examples, and this is like 1 positive examples. So that's how an MP neuron, what an MP neuron is. When you threshold it properly, you're going to construct an hyperplane. So this is like in 2 dimensions, it's a line. But in 3 dimension, like as we discussed before, it's going to be a plane. This particular, what this MP neuron does is, it constructs a plane such a way that all those points above the plane are positive and all those points below the plane are negative. So that's what it does in a 3-dimensional sense. So here you have 3 equations. x1 plus x2 plus x3 is greater than or equal to 1. That is a plane. In a geometric sense. So that's what MP neuron does as a hyperplane, separating hyperplane. Yes, this is all about MP neurons, the mechaelectric neurons, and obviously it is suffering from a lot of details, which we will be discussing. What is the first problem with it? See, we have only Boolean inputs, x1, x2, like what MP, McCulloch and Pitt suggests is, the input should be Boolean. But in real life, do we have everything only as Boolean? No. We have integer, we do have Boolean inputs, but we still have a lot of integer inputs. So that was a big drawback of this MP neuron model, because it could only take in Boolean inputs. And how to find the threshold, then manually finding it. See, whenever I asked for a threshold for this theta, we actually hand coded it. We actually we just gave a random guess such a way that it is able to accommodate our hypothesis. But is that a good thing? Machine learning is about learning, not hand coding. So that is the problem here, is that we can't find the threshold other than manually finding it. And all inputs are equally weighted. Here the g of x, give me a moment. Yeah, the g of x, it just adds all the inputs. It just takes it and adds it. x1 plus x2 plus x3. It is not giving any weights. Like what I'm telling is, that can be a particular example that the x1 feature can be more important than the other 2. So that particular weighing logic is missing in MP neuron, and that's a problem here. And what about the functions that are not really linearly separable? So what I'm meaning, what does it mean? What does it mean is, see here we are able to separate the positive points and negative points. Let's say these are like negative points, and these are positive points, and we have a line that is going to separate the both. But what if the data points are not linearly separable? The best example is the XOR function, which we saw before. Like it is not linearly separable. So what do we do in that case? So these were the drawbacks of MP neuron. So that's what people wanted to move forward with like like improve upon MP neuron, and then that gave birth to something called as perceptron. Frank and Rosenblatt created this configuration. So how it differs from MP neuron is, instead of a normal Boolean inputs, you will have a real inputs. You can have any real numbers as your inputs. Number one. Number two, the sum is no more going to be just a random, just an absolute addition. It's going to be a weight addition. So each input will have a weight. X1 is having W1, X2 is having W2, and so on. So the G of X, which just adds the inputs in MP neuron, here in perceptron, it's gonna do a weighted sum, as you could see. But the thresholding is going to be same almost. See, what is the difference we had before? We had sigma xi is greater than or equal to theta in MP neuron. Here, it is going to be sigma wi into xi is greater than or equal to theta. Then you will predict as 1, or else you will predict as 0. And this is just bring the theta to the other side, and this is the common convention of writing the equation, that sigma wxi minus theta is greater than or equal to 0, then give 1. If sigma wxi minus theta is less than 0, then output as 0. So this is how a perceptron, this is the logic of perceptron. Yeah, this is the different, the difference from MP neuron. This is inputs can be real. There is sum of weight in inputs, and the biggest difference is the weights here. The Wi, W1, W2, and Wn. These weights can be learned. These weights can be automatically learned, and the threshold, even the threshold, this theta, this particular theta can also be learned. So as I told, right? See, in this particular MP neuron, we hand coded this theta. We hand coded the threshold. But what perceptron does is, you can learn the threshold. You can learn on its own, and this actually falls into the template of machine learning, that you will learn a particular parameters and you learn a particular threshold. So that's the starting point of perceptron. Sorry, and a more accepted convention is, what you do is, we have sigma wxi minus theta, right? So what you can do is, instead of writing this minus theta as a threshold separately, you can give a weight as, you can give an extra input called x0 equal to 1 and set the weight to minus theta. So it will be some more, again, if you sum up, it is going to give the same equation. It's going to give this, it's going to give the same equation, but it's written in a different form, that we are adding an extra input and setting the weight to be minus theta. So why is this actually useful is because, since we have to learn all the W's, we can learn it on one go. So that's the intuition behind rewriting the old equation to the new equation. So that's perceptron model. This is the base of the perceptron model. Now let us see, now let's try to hand code the weights and thresholds, and later we'll see a perceptron learning model. So again, we'll come to the good old OR function. So this is the OR function table, right? 0, 0 gives 0, 1, 0 gives 1, 0, 1 gives 1, and 1, 1 gives 1. So this is the particular thing we want to hand code. So what does the perceptron model say? W0 into 1, W0 into 1 is W0, and W1 into X1. So W1 into X1 is for 4 different examples, we have written 4 hidden equations. So W0 plus W1 X1 plus W2 X2. Here it is 0. So this must be less than 0. But in all other 3 cases, it is 1. So it should be greater than or equal to 0. You understood, right? We are writing the same. We are writing the equation for our function. So W0 plus W1 X1 plus W2 X2 is greater than or equal to 0 if the output is 1. W0 plus W1 X1 plus W2 X2 is less than 0 only if the output is 0. So that's what you are doing it. See, only in the first case the output is 0. So we are writing the equation in such a form. So if you rewrite the conditions again, you will get these 4 conditions: that W1 must be less than 0, W2 must be greater than or equal to minus W0, W1 must be greater than or equal to minus W0, and W1 plus W2 must be greater than or equal to minus W0. So these 4 inequalities arising from this particular equations. So whatever the equation we put it here, we take it for an OR function, put the values and see the conditions. So one of the conditions that might satisfy one of the set of values that might satisfy all these conditions is W0 equal to -1, W1 equal to 1.1, and W2 equal to 1.1. So these set of values will satisfy these conditions. So this can act as a line for a OR function. So as you could, this is the particular line. This for these particular values, this is the line. And as you could see, whatever the points that lies above the line is positive, that is 1, and whatever the points that lies below the line is negative or 0, like whatever. So this is what a perceptron does again. Like similar to an MPD neuron, but here we have different weights, so it can it can denote any line. And as you can see, this is not the only line. This is like one possible solution for this inequality. There can be multiple possible solutions. So even this particular, let's say like this particular line somewhat below, even this can act as a candidate for the hyperplane. Yes, but this is again this is we generated this inequality and we manually guessed the sum values for this. That's why that all these inequalities are satisfied. But again, in machine learning, that is not going to be the case. We need to learn these weights. We need to learn what is W0, W2, and W1, like all these three things. So that came something called perceptron learning algorithm. Before that, we will just look into the error functions. So what is an error function? So here, what can potentially be an error? Suppose say, if you are predicting this point as 0, which you are not supposed to do, then it can be considered as an error. So that's what we'll look at it now. Let's say this particular line, -1 minus x1 minus x2 equal to 0. Let's say if you take this line as the hyperplane, what it does, it generates everything as positive because all 4 points are lying above this line. It generates everything as 1, but actually only three of these points are 1 and this is supposed to be 0. So it is slightly, just give me a moment. I think it's the wrong diagram. So sorry. Like, really sorry. So let's say let's start with this line. Sorry. Really sorry. Let's start with this line. So this line is 0.45x1 plus 0.45x2 minus 1 is 0. So what does this do? Whatever the points are above, it generates as 1, and whatever the points are below, it generates as 0. So but here the problem is all points are below this line, so it will generate everything as 0. But in reality, only 0, 0 is supposed to be 0, and all these 3 points are supposed to be 1. So it is making error for 3 points. That's what it's an error. This particular line, 0.45x1 plus 0.45x2, it is making 3 errors. But let's say take one more example. 1.5 W1 as 1.5 and W2 as 0. So this is going to be the particular line representing that weights, like that particular parameters. So for this line, let's see like what is the error. Whatever that is to the right, it's supposed to be 1, and whatever it's to the left, it's supposed to be 0. And again, it's making a mistake because this is supposed to be 1, but it is predicting as 0. Because see, this is the line. Whatever is in the right, it is predicting as 0, and whatever is in the right is predicting as 1, and whatever is in the left, it is predicting as 0. Since this number should be actually 1, but it's predicting it as 0, it is an error. But all other 3 points are classified correctly. So this 1.5 x1 for this particular weight values, the error is 1. And finally, we have this particular line where it generates everything as 1, and again it makes 3 errors. So this is the idea about errors. And like if you plot the W1 and W2, like this is we just picked 3 different weights. But let's say like if you vary this W1 W2 and plot the errors, this is going to be the error function you're going to get. So for whatever W1, W2 values fall in this region, the error is going to be high, and whatever the W1, W2 values that's falling in here, the error is going to be medium, and here this particular region is our ideal region. For all W1 comma W2 pass, the error is minimum. So the error scale is given shown below. For like blue means 0 and blue means low error and red means high error. As you can see here, this is the blue region. So our W1 comma W2 should be around this particular region to generate the best classification line. See, for example, this is 1.1x1 plus 1.1x2. This is actually a very good line, and as you could see, that particular point falls here. Like 1.1 comma 1.1 will fall somewhere here, and it gives 0 error. So that's what this error surface does. We plot W1 comma W2, and in the third dimension we plot the errors. So what is our requirement is to come up with an algorithm that could lead you directly to here. Instead of like till now we hand coded everything. We hand coded the weights. Instead of hand coding, can we have an algorithm that will find us the optimal region? So that's the question in hand, and that's where the perceptron learning algorithm comes into play. So this is the perceptron learning algorithm. So what it does is, it takes for a point. Like we have an initial guess. We have an initial guess for this W1 and W2. We have an initial guess, and we do a loop, a while loop. What happens is, whenever the W and a positive point, the angle between them is putting in layman terms, if there's a point that has been misclassified by a particular line, and that happens to be a positive point, then update the weight by W equal to W plus X. So, or if there is a misclassification and the point is negative, it falls into the negative class, then update the weights by W equal to W minus X. So that's the perceptron learning algorithm that was proposed, and it really worked. So what actually happens is, let's say you have a line. So this is the particular line, and as you could see, it is a line out of this is going to misclassify, because let's say if it is misclassifying a positive point, what actually happens is W equal to W plus X. So it pulls the line towards it. When you do a vector addition, W equal to W plus X, it pulls the separating hyperplane towards the positive points, and for negative points, it pushes the separating hyperplane away the points. So what in turns it does is, it wants to come up with the W such a way that this is the W, that the line for which it is the line out of that slope is going to be an optimal hyperplane. Let's imagine, right? See now this is the optimal W we want, because when you take a dot product of W1 with P1, P2 or P3 is going to give positive, which means it's spreading as positive class, and with N1 and N2 negative, it's going to give a negative, because it's the angle between the negative points and the W is obtuse, so it's going to give you a negative angle. But let's say, what if it was the other way around? Let's say the W is in the in a different let's say like W is around here, which means it is classifying few negative points. So what happens is, this particular line gets pushed away. It increases what this perceptron learning algorithm essentially does is, it reduces the angle between the weights and the positive points, and it increases the angle between the weights and the negative points, and at one point you have an optimal line. So that's what the perceptron learning algorithm does. I'm sorry, like if I had an access to a blackboard, I could have explained how it reduces the angles and everything. I know it's like slightly superficial. Apologies, like if it is causing any inconvenience. Yeah, so this is how people develop the perceptron learning algorithm, and it was the very first algorithm. It was the very first machine learning algorithm, or a neural network algorithm that made computer to learn the weights instead of hand coding them. Yeah, this is the perceptron model, but there is some problem with this. I think I touched upon it before when I discussed about MP neuron, and the same limitations is there for a perceptron 2. What about a XOR function? I just give you a minute to look at this particular thing to understand why we can't use the single layer perceptron for a XOR gate. See, this is XOR logic, right? X1 comma x2, if it is 0 comma 0, we have to give 0. 1 comma 0, you have to give it as 1. 0 comma 1, the output must be 1. 1 comma 1, the output must be 0. So let's say even if you want to hard code the weights, what is this? W0 plus W1 plus W0 plus W1x1 plus W2x2 must be less than 0 whenever the output is less than equal to 0, and the weighted sum must be greater than or equal to 0 whenever the output equal to 1. So we are writing the same thing again here, and we get these three kind of inequalities: W0 less than 0, W2 greater than minus W0, W1 greater than minus W0, and W1 plus W2 is less than minus W0. This is like not even possible, because like I mean it's obvious, right? When if W1 plus W2 must be less than minus W0, there is no way that W2 comma W1 can be greater than minus W0. So this particular equation is not solvable. It is not solvable by a single perceptron actually. So which means that the single perceptron cannot mimic the XOR function. Putting in a geometric perspective, see, these are the negative points: 0 comma 1 and 1 comma 0. 0 comma 1 and 1 comma 0 are the, like the red points, and 0 comma 0 and 1 comma 1 are the blue points. So we need a line to classify these two, but any line, no line can't divide this plane. A line is not able to divide this particular plane to create a XOR function. So this was the limitations of a perceptron, which means a single layer perceptron can only learn hyperplanes only if the data is linearly separable. If it is not a linearly separable function like a XOR function, a single layer perceptron will fail. So what is the solution? People came with an ingenious solution of multi-layer perceptrons. So instead of a single perceptron, use multiple different layers of perceptron. That's what people started to develop. So what actually happens is, let's see here. This is like there are 4 perceptrons in the first layer, and there is 1 perceptron in the second layer. Now assume this: a real edge, a red edge is denoting -1 weight, and blue edge is denoting +1 weight. I repeat once again for clarity. There are these two are inputs. X1 and X2 are inputs, and this is the perceptron. And since it's a perceptron, we need to provide weights as well. For now, assume the weights are fixed. So assume that a red edge indicates the weight is -1, and the blue edge indicates that a weight is +1. So what happens here? Let's just see. Let's take 0 comma 0. So X1 is 0 and X2 is 0. And when you sum up and assume the bias is -2, sorry, I forgot to mention that, and assume the bias is -2. What happens when X1 comma X2 is 0 comma 0? So 0 plus 0 minus 2, this particular thing won't fire. And take 1 comma 0. 1 comma 0 is going to give you 1 into -1 plus 0 into +1, which is again -1, and -1 is again greater than the bias. So it is hand coded in such a way that a single perceptron will fire only for one of the inputs. Is it clear, or should I repeat it? So what I'm telling is, the weights and the bias, though we hard coded it, it is in such a way that the weighted sum of the inputs will fire only for one of this input. For example, the first input will fire only the first neuron. The second input will fire only the second neuron. The third input will fire only the third neuron, and fourth input will fire only the fourth neuron. So which means that ingeniously we have created such a way that this neuron's output will be 1 only for one of these particular inputs. So that's a ingenious solution, because now you can set these weights in such a way that based on what this what these set of neurons fires. So a multi-layer perceptron can start to improve uh, a multi-layer perceptron can improve upon the existing single-layer perceptron and is able to generate predictions for XOR gate. So I think this is the ultimate breakthrough of a neural network, because they came up with the proposition that any Boolean function can be designed using this multi-layer network of perceptron, but you have to choose the weights ideally. So that's the intuition behind multi-layer network of perceptron. And then from this multi-layer network of perceptron, we moved on to feed-forward neural networks. See, there is one problem with perceptron. So what actually happens is, see, if sigma WAXA is greater than the threshold, then it is 0, or else it is 1. So it is like too harsh thresholding logic. What I am mentioning it as too hard is, let's say if this sigma WIXI is 0.49. If it's 0.49 and the threshold is 0.5, you'll still give it a 0. Even though the summation is so close to the threshold, you'll still predict it as 0. And let's say if it is 0.51, see, 0.51 is just above threshold, very just above threshold. But since the threshold is 0.5, you'll just predict it as y equal to 1. So that's the problem, right? We can't tell how close it is to the threshold. We can't really tell. We can't really tell the probability that the output is very close to the threshold, and that thresholding logic is really harsh. What I mean by harsh is, let's see in the diagram. Sorry, yeah. This is the blue line represents the perceptron thresholding logic. So if sigma WIXI is greater than W naught, then 1. If it is even 0.001 less than threshold, give it as 0. So this blue line represents the perceptron logic, and that's what I meant by harsh. If you are even slightly greater than threshold, it is 1. Even if you are slightly less than the threshold, it is 0. So this is not the way how it was supposed to be for classification, because for any classification algorithm, you can give the probability of the class. You can tell the probability that the class belongs to 1 is like 0.8 or something. You always have the convenience of it, and that's what gave birth to the sigma neuron. Instead of a normal perceptron, we gave birth to the sigma neuron. This particular function, 1 by 1 plus e power minus sigma WIXI, this is called as the sigmoid function. In other words, in a very common term, it can be called as the logistic function. So this gave birth to the sigma neuron. Now let us see what happens. Let's say we have W0 plus W1, we have W0 plus sigma WXI. This particular value inside the brackets, it is similar to what g of x does in the perceptron. But here, how it is different? Like we had an exponential and we take inverse of it. Now let's say, what if W0 plus sigma WXI is minus infinity? Let's say if it is minus infinity, it will be 1 plus e power minus of minus infinity, which means this particular term will become e power infinity, which means it will give y equal to 0. So if it is around minus infinity, it is going to give y equal to 0. And if it is plus infinity, let's say if W0 plus sigma WXI is plus infinity, then it's going to be 1 by 1 plus e power minus infinity. So this e power minus infinity will tend to 0 and y equal to 1. So that's what happens, right? So if it is at one extreme, it gives us 0. If it is another extreme, it gives us 1. But some intermediate values, let's say if it is 0, W0 plus sigma WXI is equal to 0, it will give 1 by 1 plus e power 0, which is 1. So it will give y equal to 0.5. So instead of having a hard thresholding logic, what a sigmoid neuron does is, it gives a stable growth, and it's 0.5, the y is 0.5 at the threshold, and it is like 1 at the infinity when it tends to infinity. So this is the intention of the sigmoid neuron. So this actually gave birth to a lot of advancement in neural networks. Now let us see, y is equal to 1 by 1 plus e power minus sigma WXI, and this y can be modeled as probability that y equal to 1. So instead of instead of having a harsh logic, just have a probability based logic here. So that gave birth to the sigmoid neuron. Yeah, but again, like any other machine learning algorithm, we need to learn the weights. We need to learn what W0, Wi, and everything is. So that's when the gradient descent came into play. Before that, we'll just touch upon some function for regression. So whatever we discussed before with neurons, it is full of classification, whether it's 0 or 1. But you need not restrict yourself to classification, right? This Y can be any real number. If it's a real number, you're trying to predict the real number, which means it turns into a regression problem. So a common error function for the regression problem is root mean square error. So what you do is you have predicted y cap minus actual y, the whole square. You're summing it up and taking the average. So that is called error function. As you can see, let's say this is the line you're predicting, and this is the actual point. Then this is going to be the error. So what you're doing is you're taking these errors, squaring it up, summing it up, and taking an average, and at finally taking a square root of it. So that is called RMSE. This is the error function for regression. The same thing for classification is called the cross entropy loss. So I'll just give one small intuition like why this can be useful is, let's say your actual class output is 1. When your actual class output is 1, this particular term will drop to 0 because 1 minus y is like 1 minus 1 is 0. So this particular term will drop off. So all that will remain is this particular term. This particular term only will remain. So when y equal to 1, this will be 1. So the error will be log y. Let's say your prediction is very close to 1. That is y cap is very close to 1. Then what is log of 1? Log of 1 is 0. Which means the loss is 0. So when y equal to 1 and you are predicting something close to 1, the loss is less. Let's say the y equal to 1 and you are predicting something close to 0. Like you are doing the other way around. The actual output is 1, but you are predicting something like 0.1. What does log that goes to 0? It is minus infinity. So minus infinity, and we have a negative sign outwards, it will be plus infinity. So this particular logic is designed in such a way that whenever you are predicting almost correctly, it gives less loss, and whenever you are classifying it the other way around, it gives the it gives a higher loss. Let's say if y equal to 0, when y equal to 0, this particular term goes to 0 and only this term remains. Now when you are predicting something close to 0, which means it will be 1 minus 0 is again close to 1. This will give output as 0, which means the loss is less. And if you predict the y as 1, like something, since it's y, when actual y is 1 and you're predicting something close to 0, then again you'll give a higher loss. So this particular loss function for classification is designed in such a way that whenever you are predicting correctly, you have a less loss, and when you're predicting incorrectly, you have a more loss. And what the algorithm that we used to predict is we used to find this optimal weights is called gradient descent. So what here theta is represent what W, like we had till W here, W1, W1, W2. The other convention is to write W as theta. So that's the function. So what we do is in gradient descent is we assume an initial value. We assume an initial value for the weight, and we do this particular algorithm. So at particular iteration, W equal to W minus or theta equal to theta equal to theta minus alpha times the gradient of the loss function. The gradient of the loss function with respect to the parameters. So this particular algorithm, this particular method will reduce your error and give you the optimal weights. It will give you this W1, W2, W3 in an optimal manner. It's such a way that the loss is reduced. That's the intuition behind gradient descent. The proof of gradient descent is too detailed, and that's why I just avoided this in this particular lecture because it's an introductory course. The proof actually falls into the Taylor's theorem. When you extend the Taylor's theorem with gradients, you will actually get the gradient descent. But what you actually wanted to know is, what you actually need to understand is, there is some loss function and there is some initial weight. What this particular gradient descent algorithm does is, it makes sure that you find W such a way that the loss is decreased. So that's what gradient descent is. It's just yeah, sorry, whatever we discussed before, this logistic neuron. This particular logistic neuron can be this actually mimics an algorithm called logistic regression, which you might have heard before. And like I just wanted to put that out, so that you can be amazed by it or something. Yeah, and similar to we had multi-layer perceptrons. People also told why restrict yourself to the single sigmoid neuron. You can stack up the neurons and create a multi-layered neural networks. And this is the common framework which you see every day, like almost see every time wherever when you read about neural networks. That there is an input layer, there is a hidden layer, and there can be multiple hidden layers, and there is an output layer. And there's like you can see the inputs here, and these arrows might represent some weights, and the aggregation leads to an output, and these weights are learned by gradient descent. And for this for neural networks perspective, this learning method is called as backpropagation. Yeah, I think this is what gave birth to the modern neural networks. We started off with something a very simple model like MP neuron, Michelak pitch neuron, and we saw how how the limitations and limitations of the before gave birth to perceptron, and we had multi-layered perceptron. Since the threshold logic was very harsh, we moved on to sigmoid neuron, and we saw like the how gradient descent decreases the error for that decreases the error to find the optimal weights for that sigmoid neuron. And later we also saw that these sigmoid neurons can be stacked up together to form the multi-layer neural networks, which is again commonly called as feed-forward neural networks. Then like an advanced version of these things are convolution and recurrent neural networks. So think uh, I think I'm done with here. I'll be happy to answer a few questions in case if there's something bothering you, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, you can ask me, or you could put in the chat box. Yeah.
Yes, please, participants. Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, I think all are clear, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, like, just one thing is we didn't touch upon the max as deep as possible. Okay.
There is one question, sir. Okay.
I mean, so see, this particular thing can be applied in any context, right? So, let's say, like, you have an input. So, you can model some power system. Let's take a power system of a car. Like nowadays, we have electric vehicles. Can we predict whether the car is, the power of the car is overloading, or it's not? To generate an alarm output, you could take various inputs, like the torque generated due to the battery. You could take the battery temperature as another input, and the output can be overload or not. So those things you can model using neural networks. So that's a advantage of machine learning or deep learning, right? So what you can do is, if you have a set of inputs and you have like you have an output that depends on the set of inputs, you can model it as deep learning application, and train your model. And specifically, since Sir has asked for the power system, I just told, like, a small example of a power system in a car. Like, that's what, like, if you have the torque as an input and temperature as an input, and if you want to predict the overload or overload as an output, then you could use deep learning for that particular application.
if anybody, participants, if any doubts?
Yeah, for that I think one layer MLP is good enough. Yeah, that is enough. But it depends. Let's say like what I gave is a a very simple, a simple model that has only two features. But let's say in future maybe like let's say like in a power plant or something, you have like a lot of features from a lot of nodes, like you'll have different features at different nodes, right? Like you have junctions, and you have like for every junction you'll have multiple features. When the number of features increases, then a single neuron is not enough. Like when the number of features increases, then you have to increase the size of the architecture. So in that case you could go to a single multiple layers. So yeah. And for most practical purposes, a single hidden layer is more than enough, unless you are going for an image recognition or voice recognition. So only for those kind of complex complex problems where you have a lot of features, then you'll go for multiple layered networks. Is there any other question? Like, I'll be happy to answer. And as I told, like I said, provided the reference in the very first thing for deeper understanding and with more background in in mathematical background behind this deep learning and neural networks. Feel free to visit Dr. Mitesh Kapra's lecture in NPTEL, and it's like it's a very good foundation that you can find in the web. Yeah.
Sir, sir, shall we finish the session, sir?
Yes, yes, sure, ma'am, sure. Ma'am.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, particular about ANN and deep machine learning. And your presentation is really pictorial presentation, so I think this will reach the participants in a very
Um,
easy way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yes,
thank you.
yes, sir.
Your voice break in between, ma'am. Sorry.
Oh, okay, okay. So, sir, this is now it's clear, sir.
Yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay. Sir, thank you for your wonderful presentation, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.